When it comes to writing counterparts or countermelodies, true counterpoint writing is a huge study upon itself to write in a classical style. Now, what I do and what most composers that have learned in the way that I do is more like counterpart writing. We're not writing full counterpoint, we're just writing parts that interweave with our main melody, that just kind of sit with it and add to it. And there's a few things to think about when you come to write your counterparts. Just in case you don't know what I'm talking about, a counterpart is a second melody or a second voice that works with the first melody. Some people say that the counterpart should work on its own, so you could take out the main melody and the counterpoint would still work in a really great way. Personally, I think that's nonsense. The counterpart should be supporting the main part, just like your counterpart, if you're working with dialogue, should be supporting that main dialogue if you're writing film music. It doesn't necessarily have to work entirely on its own. So there's a process that I go through when creating counterparts that you should follow when you come to create your own as well. So the first thing to do is to identify breaks or potential breaks in your melody, or where you feel like the melody needs support or additional momentum. So listen to your melody and listen for where a note might be held. That's a potential break. Even though there is a note still playing, that's a pause because it's held. There's no movement to that point. Or where there's silence in your melody, find those moments. And this is the areas where you can think about adding your counter melody. Those are the breaks or potential breaks. Where a melody might need support is during a leap, for example, if you really want to draw attention to a leap, or at the climax of your contour, where you really have the main hit. That's where your melody might need support. There are two main ways of adding counterparts, and that's to either fill the gaps from your main melody. So wherever the main melody pauses or breaks, you have some counterpoint come in and do some movement. So where the main melody stops moving, the counterpart takes over and does some movements. Or you could harmonize with the main melody. So you play the same rhythms, but on different notes. So you're harmonizing. And a good counterpart should blend and bounce back and forward between those two. It's not that you have a counterpart that just only fills the gaps and then stops, or only harmonizes and then stops. It should move between filling the gaps and having movement and also harmonizing. So it should bounce back and forth between the two. Once you've identified where the breaks or potential breaks in your melody are, remembering that we're not hearing this melody for the first time. You've heard the melody 1,000 times when you've been working on it, but someone new to your melody will be hearing it for the first time. So don't go straight into adding counterparts right from beat one of your composition, because people won't know what to follow. Make sure your listeners have a clear understanding of what the melody is. They should be able to hum it back in their minds already before you really start thinking about bringing in a counterpart. So it might be on the second repeat of the full melody or the full period or sentence. Or if you have a really, really memorable motif, so it's a really key idea, and you can state that very quickly, then again, once you've heard that motif a few times, then you can start bringing your counterparts. It shouldn't be right from the get-go, though, because you'll just lose your audience. They won't know what they're supposed to be listening to. And once you've identified where you're going to add your counterparts, the next thing you need to think about is the purpose of the counterpart. What is the point of it? Is it to increase momentum, to keep the drive of the part going? Is it to increase tension, or maybe to decrease tension? Maybe you've had a lot of tension in the melody and you want your counterpart to actually pull away from a little bit. Maybe it's to remind the listener what your motif is, or to help get them back on track so to remind them of what they're listening for. Is it supposed to lead into the next note? You might have a scale in your counterpart, an ascending scale that allows the main melody to creep back in. And then once you've decided the purpose of your counterpart, once you really know why you're doing it, because what's the point of doing anything if you don't know why you're doing it? Once you know why you're doing it, I'd recommend, just like we did with our main melody, to work rhythmically first. The reason I recommend that you start rhythmically is it's going to help you find ways of matching the motif of your melody a bit easier. A counterpart still needs to be related to the original melody, so it still needs to use the same rhythms, the same stepwise or skipwise motion from your main melody so that you are still using the motivic elements in your counterpart as well. So start rhythmically, identify where those breaks are and mark them out, and then play your melody and listen, and then clap as along. Once you have your melody playing, just think, okay, what's going to be the rhythm of my counterpart to start with? So you might have from my melody before, bo ba bo ba ba, and you're just filling in those gaps with rhythmical ideas first. Once you have your rhythm, then you can add the notes. And again, try to draw those notes from the motifs that you have in your main melody. So if there's lots of scalic patterns, like say ascending scales in your motifs, you've got a 4-note ascending ba 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 in your motif, use that in your counter melody as well. Modulated or elements of it, you could truncate it, so you just use the first 2 notes of the ascending scale, but find ways to make the notes similar to the notes in your main melody as well. And then once you've got those ideas, you can use those tension and relief or the developmental techniques that we've looked at in the course to improve that counter part, to make sure it works, that it's a strong part, and that it really is fulfilling its purpose. So if the purpose is to add tension, go back to the developmental techniques on adding tension and think about which ones you could use. Maybe you could add a wider interval to make your counterpoint really increase that tension. Or if it's to decrease the tension, again, maybe have it descend back to the tonic while your main melody is holding a really uncomfortable note. Use the tension and relief and developmental techniques to improve that counterpart. I'm now going to show you a string piece that has counterpoint in it that I created so you can see how these steps are implemented into an actual piece. So this is a piece that I put together for my string orchestration course, so it's all on string instruments, but the melody is up here, and as we can see, it's got a variety of stepwise and skips and some big leaps in it as well. One leap isn't particularly well prepared because no note to really come up close to it, but that was done for effect because we really wanted this second section to stand out. So when you do things for effect, you don't have to always follow the rules. But just so you can hear how that melody sounds. So in terms of motifs and things, you can see we have this ba 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 bum. That's one of the key motifs. It happens twice, and we also have that ba da 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 dum. Just a descending scale pattern, basically stepwise, as well as these big leap that we have a couple of times that appears as well. So for counter melodies, they're actually spread across a few different parts here. You can see there's violin 2, violin 1, and the viola as well. It's labeled as violin 1, it's just another violin 2 part. So let's start with the second violin part and what that's doing. So on the second iteration of the melody, you wouldn't really do this on the first time round because, again, people wouldn't know what they're listening for. But you can see when the first violin part holds a note, the second violin part comes and takes over the momentum, and then the second violin holds, so it's kind of holding a harmony underneath while the first violin part moves. Let's have a listen to how that works. This is only for the first half. So wherever the main melody felt like it needed some extra momentum, that's when I brought in the violin 2 part. If you imagine you'd heard this melody once through, well, you have just heard it once through on its own, you've had lots of long notes. If it repeats and we have that, straight away the listener is going to think, oh, here we go again. It's a long note. So by having the violin two part just take over, ba, 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 bum, you have something else to listen to. It helps keep that momentum going. And in the second half, a second violin two part takes over as well. The reason that is the first violin two part that I had jumps up to this really high note that just sticks in over the top, which again is kind of a counterpoint. It's a pedal note that's held at the top as counterpoint, but it's more just to add a bit of texture to the top. But as you can see, the second violin part that's added, that's this one down here, follows the rhythm of that first part exactly. One thing I didn't mention about the original part as well is if you look at the contour of that melody, the arch shape, we have the same thing happening, just drawn out a little bit in that violin two part. So you can see how the motif is repeated in that counterpart. Coming back to the second part, you can see it's the same rhythm throughout. It's just a harmony throughout the whole thing. So I wanted that part to be supported a bit more because it jumps up into a weaker register of the violin and this big leap kind of comes out of nowhere. I wanted that second violin part to support it. So you can see how our counterpart moved from working to fill the pulse and the movement to then harmonizing a little bit, having a bit more movement, and then to complete harmonization. So not altering the movement of that piece at all. And then we have a viola part as well. I'll add these one at a time so we can look at them in two sections. So the viola part, to begin with, is harmonizing. We harmonize with that first melody. You can see all the movements the same. Even this second statement of the motif, ba, 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 in the viola part, rhythmically it stays the same, but we've done a permutation. So rhythmically it stays the same, but the notes are moving in a different order. We're not following that same contour. We're moving downwards instead. So let's hear those together. As you can hear, the movement was the same, but we harmonized. It still sounds quite different because of the shape of that melody, though. And in the second half, remembering the second half, the violin two part just became a complete harmony with violin one. So in the second part of the melody, the viola takes over the movement. So wherever the violin one and violin two parts are holding a note, the viola starts moving again, because I wanted to add more momentum on this second repetition of the melody. And again, notice how the movement of the viola mimics the movement of that melody as well. And let's hear that whole thing together now. With the basses and cellos and everything, and you can hear how powerful counterpoint writing can be, counterpart writing, when it fills that gap and when it moves between supporting, just like harmonizing, and then also moves into adding movement and momentum. Apologies if you hear any clicks and pops. My system's struggling a bit to run all of the recording software at the same time as Logic and all the audio as well. Melody. And there you have it, counterpart writing. So, more homework. For this lesson, obviously, the homework is to actually try and add a counterpart to the melody that you've been creating. Again, coming back to our process of doing this, only add counter melodies or counterparts where they need to be added to keep the momentum and to give purpose to the melody. Decide on what the purpose of your counterpart is, work rhythmically first, and then add the notes, and then use your tension and relief and developmental techniques to improve that counterpart. And make sure you use part of the motif from your original melody in the counterpart so that they are intrinsically woven together. I should also say that people often say that this counterpoint writing and counterpart writing requires absolute genius levels of music because you need to be able to simultaneously compute melodic part and harmony and make sure they bleed together and that they all work perfectly together and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be that difficult. Trust your ears, trust your instinct. And if you follow these steps of the first most important thing is working out where you actually want your counterparts to be and what you want your counterparts to do. Those first two steps, part 1 and part 2, follow those steps and straight away you'll be on the right track and you'll take away all of that complicated stuff. Trust your instincts, trust your ears, but just work out where and why you're adding counterpoint and you'll be good to go. Okay, crack on with that homework, adding counterparts to your existing melody.